Hello dear friends, let me wish all of you in anticipation a very happy feast of Saint Anne, your patroness. And I welcome you all to this talk on the topic of today, autonomy and service. This topic seems to present two contentious issues, autonomy and service, the human thirst for autonomy or freedom from God and the church's desire to serve humanity. While individuals seek autonomy, church's mission has always been to serve humanity. So our reflection today is based on the document of Second Vatican Council, Gaudium et Spes, numbers 33 to 45. And the topic can be divided into 6 sections based on these 13 articles mentioned earlier. And they are: first, the temptation to replace God. Second, secularity and secularization. Third, the church in the world. Fourth, the laity in the church and in the world. 5, guided by the spirit of the gospel. And 6, the church and the world today. Let me begin by speaking on the first section titled The Temptation to Replace God. One fundamental question that we need to ask ourselves today is, can human beings replace God? This question actually arises from the feeling human beings have of self-sufficiency. And this feeling of self-sufficiency actually results from the extraordinary progress that humans have made in the field of science and technology, which is credited to the intelligence of human beings. This led to a feeling that we can even replace God. We don't need God. Already from the time of Adam and Eve, we see that they wanted to replace God, that they could do everything by themselves, that they were self-sufficient, and they thought that God is unnecessary. In fact, the humans believed that the Creator was an impediment, a block, and an unbearable barrier to their growth, both physical and intellectual. This ancient problem is well articulated in the pastoral constitution on the church in the contemporary world, Gaudium et Spes. This was issued by the Second Vatican Council on 7th December 1965. The same question, which was taken up by the Second Vatican Council, is also taken up later on by Pope John Paul II in his penultimate encyclical titled Fides et Ratio. And again today, Pope Francis wants that the path of preparation for the Holy Year, the Jubilee year 2025, takes up this question once again. The reason why this same topic is treated again and again is because we are living in an era in which man had to admit his impotence, his powerlessness, especially in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic and in the face of the unpredictable tragedies of the contemporary world. In fact, until now, we have believed that we are able to dominate anything, thanks also to the technologies that have broken down physical barriers, truly making the earth globalized reality. In contrast, the pandemic has radically, quickly and violently overturned the ephemeral, the fleeting conviction, breaking down every defensive wall. The deafening silence of cities all over the planet during the lockdown made humans feel small, alone and defenseless in the face of the enormity of creation. And there, the believer has found comfort in God. This was seen in an extraordinary moving prayer for the end of the pandemic, the Statio Orbis of 27th April 2020, which Pope Francis presided over in the deserted and rainy St. Peter's Square. I am sure most of you would have watched this on the television or on YouTube. It was a cry of hope for all intents and purposes. The pandemic was something that man was absolutely not prepared for. Endless rows of coffins taken away by army trucks. Men and women hospitalized in intensive care away from their loved ones. People who died without being able to be greeted by relatives and without having a funeral service conducted. This was a time that many of us felt we needed a God. In this situation, some of us may ask, where was this God in those months? The answer is, He was in fact crucified once again in those who fought against that terrible and dark evil. All those who fought loneliness, all those who did their utmost to be able to help those in difficulty. Then there was the hand of God made present through the doctors, the nurses, the supermarket workers, the cleaners, the caregivers, the transporters, the police forces, the volunteers, the priests and religious and so many others who came to help the needy. In fact, this event translated what is said in Gaudium et Spes article number 34, which states, "For while providing the substance of life for themselves and for their families, men and women are performing their activities in a way which appropriately benefits society." The pandemic helped us to realize, first of all, that autonomy of man is not attained by freeing ourselves from God. And secondly, that there is no opposition between God and human potential. The Council explains this in the following words. Thus, far from thinking that works produced by man's own talent and energy are in opposition to God's power, and that the rational creatures exist as a kind of rival to the Creator, Christians are convinced that the triumphs of the human race are a sign of God's grace and the flowering of His own mysterious design. Hence, we should say that humans must look at themselves as one chosen to serve others, as the gospel calls us, to be good Samaritans to those in need. Gaudium et Spes, article number 35 says, "A man is more precious for what he is than for what he has." But unfortunately, there is a tendency in today's world for amassing riches for oneself, so that one can enjoy this life only by oneself. This tendency has led to an erroneous desire to free oneself from the religious world. So the second section presents the temptation found among the contemporary humans to believe that a creature truly emancipates itself when it distances or even denies its creator. But Gaudium et Spes, article number 36, reminds us that without the creator, the creature would disappear. It's a false notion that autonomy from God is essential for the growth of man, the evolution of man, or that real physical and intellectual maturation of humans can take place only by freeing themselves from the Creator. It's a false notion. The document reminds us that faith and reason are like two wings with which the human spirit rises towards the truth. Faith and reason are not antitheses. They are not in opposition to each other, but they are allies. They are partners. It is false to think that a believer is less developed because he or she is a believer. Instead, faith in fact helps one to know the truth better. Therefore, Gaudium et Spes, article number 37, calls us to purify and perfect ourselves in our intellectual pride and self-love through the power of the cross and resurrection of Jesus. The cross of Christ must be lived in our daily life, at home, at the workplace, at community meetings, and at individual encounters with one another. The Pope, the cardinals, the bishops, the priests, and the religious and others wear a cross on their chests. The cross of Christ is not an ornament. It is an announcement of salvation, the coming of the kingdom. We can incarnate the cross in today's world by the service that we do. Helping one's neighbor is not just a simple and commendable philanthropy, but recognizing the suffering and abandoned Jesus in the needy neighbor. This is the truth that is called in the parable of the last judgment narrated in the Gospel of Matthew chapter 25. This is exactly what Mother Teresa taught us through her life witness. In the suffering poor, she recognized the Christ crucified. Remember, Pope Francis has repeatedly invited the faithful to touch the flesh of the poor while giving alms. Don't just throw alms into the hands of the poor, but touch them. There are other truly edifying examples of men and women, individuals and associations who testify daily to their love and closeness to the poor. The third section of this document we are dealing with today speaks of the church in the world. Pope John the 23rd opened the doors of the church to the contemporary world. There is a mutual relationship between the church and the world. The Catholic Church is a reality suspended between heaven and earth. One can wrongly assume that the church is destined or disinterested in the earthly realities and is attracted only by the eschatological realities. The truth is that the church is also concerned about the day-to-day life of the human person. The saving purpose of the church, which is proper to her mission, includes strengthening the human society and imbuing the everyday activities of the human person. The fourth section, it elaborates on the role of the lay person in the church and in the world. The laity would naturally include also the consecrated religious women. All of you. Gaudium Spes number 41 reiterates that the gospel is entrusted to the whole church. The laity are not just objects of the mission of the church, but are its active subjects. An overly clericalized church cannot fulfill its mission adequately. A committed laity can also work constantly for evangelization. The opening of the ministries of lector and acolytes to the lay persons, the institution of the ministry of the catechists, etc., are indications of the recognition of the role of the laity in evangelization. Fifthly, the document highlights another important task of the church, namely, working for the unity in the world, guided by the spirit of the gospel. By virtue of her mission, the church is not bound to any particular culture or any social, political, or economic systems. She is universal. She is Catholic. For this reason, the church invites Catholics and the rest of humanity to overcome all forms of strife between nations and races. The church is also willing to assist and promote any just human associations or institutions that promotes unity in the world. It is in the spirit, for example, that we understand the offer of mediation by Pope Francis for the end of the war in Ukraine. The primary objective of the Catholic Church is to bring the gospel message of peace for people of goodwill. So Gaudium Spes, Article 43, exhorts Christians to strive faithfully to fulfill their earthly duties according to the spirit of the gospel. There should not be any false opposition between the professional and social activities on the one hand and the spiritual and the religious activities on the other. Gaudium Spes, Article 43, emphatically states that the Christian who neglects his or her temporal duties neglects also his or her duties towards God and religion. So it's a call to be witnesses of unity in a fragmented world. The church can do that authoritatively only if she fights divisiveness within herself, divisions within herself. The sixth and the final section speaks of the need for a warm relationship that must exist between the church and the world. Gaudium Spes affirms that the church receives help from the contemporary world. The church is a historical reality. She is aware that she has profited much from the historical development of humanity, so science and technology. She must in turn help the world to develop. The church herself is called to come out of herself and go to the peripheries, not only geographical peripheries, but also existential peripheries of sin, of pain, of injustice, of ignorance, of absence of faith. In particular, the church must pay attention to the existence of religious indifference that exists in the world today. The problem can be solved by leading the world towards an experience of a religion that goes beyond external ritualistic practices of religion. We need to make our religion experiential. So, dear sisters, as consecrated women, let us place our abilities at the disposal of the church and the society through our commitment to serve. Let me note that it is the responsibility of the entire church to make her a visible sign, a sacrament of salvation to the world. Let us remember that our own inconsistent way of living our faith is a stumbling block or a scandal to many. Let us be examples of strong adherence to God and to our faith by leading a life of charity, service, and authentic unity in our own personal and community life. May God bless our efforts in this regard.